Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues, students, participants of the fourth presidential conference, good morning and welcome to the first panel of the day. My name is Renana Perez and I'm from the marketing department at the Business School of the Hebrew University. And me and my friends here, the other panel members, we are all very excited to have you here, and we are thankful that you chose our panel. And we hope to spend a very stimulating and vibrant 90 minutes of discussions with you. And our panel today deals with one of the most fascinating social revolutions in the history of mankind, a revolution that we call the network revolution. And actually, it's so revolutionary that we even term it the next step in human evolution. And you know, some of the theories of human evolution relate to an event that happened 50,000 years ago, an event that they termed the Great Leap Forward. And according to those theories, the Homo sapiens went under a sudden change. It could be probably a result of a large mutation, and they started to demonstrate behaviors that were not familiar to their more primitive ancestors. Behaviors such as playing music, making jewelry, exchanging and bartering with other groups, and cooking. And during the last decade, we have been facing what we can call the modern Great Leap Forward. So the Homo sapiens, which during the last 50,000 years managed to master the fire, invent the alphabet, build houses and towns, and land on the moon, is now going under very deep sociological change. Instead of living on with their own families, towns, and communities, people now extend their social networks and manage to do with it things that are beyond the wildest dreams of people only a few decades ago. And can you show the presentation, please? Can you turn it on? So, thank you. Yeah. So this next stage in evolution could be termed Homo connecticus, or if you prefer Latin, it's Homo ejunctus. And physically, the connecticus looks exactly like the Homo sapiens, but virtually it has this additional new and powerful organ. It's a social network, and using this social network, the connecticus manages to sense and to learn and to impact the world around him. And at this very, very moment, millions of connecticuses are using Wikipedia, and they put posts on discussion forums and blogs to promote topics they're interested in. They post on YouTube to express their creativity. They use Amazon's Mechanical Turk to help them to accomplish tasks they cannot accomplish themselves. And together they exchange opinions, they make regimes rise and fall, they recruit employees and collaborators, and they reach a realm of influence that was previously saved only for rulers, kings, and generals. And our panel today is dedicated to the Homo connecticus. The four of us, we are very enthusiastic specimens of connecticus. We gathered here to share with you some of our thoughts, reflections, and hopes for the life in a connecticus society. So we have with us today Ms. Yonka Brunini, who is a senior marketing director at Google, and her job is to connect people in the Middle East, Europe, and Africa with each other through Google platforms and product. We have Professor Sinan Aral from NYU, and he's an entrepreneur and an information system researcher, and he explores the structure and dynamics of social network. We have Professor Raj Reddy from Carnegie Mellon University, and he is a computer scientist, maybe the computer scientist, who studies the relationships of technology and society, and he is one of the founders of the Million Digital Books project and the Universal Digital Library, and myself. And the four of us, with your help, will try to answer some questions regarding the Homo connecticus. So we will start with short, brief presentations by each of us, and then we will open the panel for discussion. And we are a large group here, but in the spirit of the Connecticus Society, we want this discussion to be as informal as possible. We are very open to your questions and comments. And I want to start by having a little Connecticus exercise, if you may. So let's open this panel by extending our social network just 1 degree of separation. Can you please look around you? Who is like sitting next to you, who is sitting in front of you, who is sitting in the back? Find one person you don't know and seems like worth knowing. Go, just introduce yourself, shake hands, and let's start building a small, tiny social network here.
Yeah. Yes, but I thought over there, so as not to cover in front. I'm thinking of standing up, so.
Okay. Okay, good job. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see that it's a group of very interesting people and you have a lot to talk about. The first question we are interested in is what are the processes through which people and societies transform from Homo sapiens to Homo connecticus? And our first speaker today is one of the most salient agents in this transformation process. And Ms. Janka Brunini, as I told you, is a senior marketing director at Google. And she is covering Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And she's responsible for marketing all Google's business and customer products. And it includes Search, mobile, Chrome, YouTube, AdWords, Display, and Google+. And she's the executive sponsor of a very interesting event called the EMEA Zeitgeist, something in German. But it's an event, it's a big conference where Google brings together people who think and who are thinking leaders and try to get some stimulation and interaction between them. And Janka is also on the board of the Google's Cultural Institute at Paris, which is founded in order to bring culture to areas or where it's not there. And she's also one of the most beloved people in this industry. You should just see her walking around here and people coming to her, kissing her, hugging her, and are so happy to see her. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Janka Brunini.
Thank you, Renana. It's very kind. Hi, everybody. Thank you for that wonderful, unexpected introduction, Renana. To answer Renana and this panel's question, are we on the verge of another great leap forward as mankind? I absolutely think so. My answer is yes. I think technology is really leveling the playing field for all of us around the world. And today I just want to give you some examples of what I'm seeing from my vantage point at Google and about this connected society. But I'd just like to start with a personal anecdote, actually, about my father. My father is a professor of electronical engineering. He's one of the renowned professors in his field. He taught at UC Berkeley. He comes actually from a village in Turkey, which has a population of 150, and still looks today the same way, almost the same way it did about 150 or 500 years ago. And yet, everybody in this village has a mobile phone. With, just punching in a few digits, they could connect to you or anyone in the world. They use the internet. They upload, for example, pictures and videos of the village and talk about how it's on the path of Alexander the Great's conquest and, you know, try to, I guess, make it attractive to tourists. And all this really surprises me because when I look around me physically in the village, when I visit around April every year, I see, you know, in the center of the village as well as in the just surrounding it, there are wells, functioning wells, where people get their water and the animals, there's a lot of animal farming in this village, get their drinking water. So, oh, sorry, I thought someone was saying no to me, but yes, there are cows that drink milk, sorry, not milk, water from these wells. So it's just one example. That's a personal example of this. Now, one again that we've seen at Google, I just want to play you the video of Zach Matere from Soy, Kenya, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. If you could play the video, please.
Not long ago, I planted a crop of potatoes. Then suddenly they started dying one after the other. Checked out the books and they didn't tell me much. So I went and I did the search. Potato diseases. One of the websites told me that ants could be the problem. It said sprinkle wood ash over the plants. Then after a few days, the ants disappeared. I got excited about the internet. I have this friend who really would like to expand his business. So we went with him to the cyber cafe and we checked out several sites. When I met him next, he was going to put a windmill at a local school. I felt proud because something that wasn't there before was suddenly there. I realized that not everybody can be able to access what I was able to access. I thought that I need to have an internet that my grandmother can use. And so I thought about a notice board, a simple wooden notice board. When I get information on my phone, I'm able to post the information on the notice board. So it's basically like a computer. I use the internet to help people. I think I'm searching for a better life for me and my neighbors. So many people have access to information, but there's no follow-up to that. I think a follow-up to that is our knowledge. When people have the knowledge, they can find solutions without having to be helped out. Information is powerful, but it is how we use it that will define us.
So this is a true story. Some people have asked me, is that, it's absolutely a true story, and I love the story. He's actually Mr. Google, isn't he, personified in his village. I love the way he says, I want to do an internet even my grandmother can use. He does his blog, which is that notice board that you saw, and he puts and shares information. And it's just one way of people using the web and sharing information. There are many, many areas dear to my heart, education, politics, health, that are being used in where Google's platforms are being used in ways we've never imagined before. And I'd just like to share some examples from those three areas, and starting, of course, with education. Everything starts with education. So one example is my friend and colleague, I've got his picture in there, Sebastian Thrun. Some of you might be familiar with him because he's one of the leading artificial intelligence minds in the world. He is the brain behind the Google's self-driving cars. He is a former Stanford professor. He actually quit Stanford to teach online. And that's the part I want to talk about. He's told me that in his first year of teaching just online for free to students around the world, whoever would want to listen to his lecture, he's made a bigger impact than he has in all his career as a professor. And you know, in Stanford, the average class is about 30. His class was very popular, around 200, he told me, and these are very privileged students paying quite a big sum for this. And imagine him reaching 200,000 students around the world, and maybe somebody you know or yourself taking his artificial intelligence lesson. So it's just one remarkable way, and you know, God knows what the future holds. Another example is in the area of art, this time something that my team initiated. There's this young marketing person in my team called Clara in Spain. She was taking all her friends that visited Madrid to the Prado Museum. And one day she said, why don't I use the Street View technology, cameras, that we use for Google Maps, inside the museum and do a virtual tour, so that people can do a virtual tour of the museum and zoom in and out of the masterpieces from anywhere around the world. So what began as Clara's initiative is now today a huge project with 151 of the top museums around the world that have been digitized and that are available for anyone to visit online for free. And it's a great way of the digital technology providing access to people who may not be able to afford or have the time to visit these museums. So museums like the Israel Museum right here in Jerusalem, or the Uffizi, or the Hermitage, or MoMA have been digitized, and this project is growing. I'd just like to show you a little video about this project. We can stop there, please. Thank you. So as you can see, people can tour the museum, see the masterpieces at close-up, create their own virtual gallery, share that on Google+. Imagine, you know, a child, a student in India or Chile, anywhere in the world, using this in part of their art class. So at Google, as you know, our mission is to organize the world's information and make it accessible to everyone. And we appreciate that not all the world's information is digital and online. Two such examples that the Cultural Institutes have worked with engineers here in Israel are the Yad Vashem Museum and the Dead Sea Scrolls that have been digitized. So one of the world's most important, if not probably the most important Holocaust museum is now digitized. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which are so important, and you can't even touch them. They're very perishable and so precious. They have been digitized. You could search them. So all this is being now accessible to everyone around the world. And those are just some educational examples. Now, a little bit to health. My first example is, I'll show a picture when it comes up. It's about a product, it's using a product we call Hangouts on Google+. This is what it looks like when you're on a Hangout. And basically, up to 10 people can do a video conferencing, but they don't need to know each other. Anybody can join that Hangout if they can just see that it's happening right now. And this has a touching story where a teenager boy gets shot in a gunfight by a gun in Kentucky. And in the small town where he is, the only person available at the hospital is a general surgeon, yet the boy needs a hip, and he's been shot at the hip and spine, so he needs, like, if he doesn't get orthopedic surgeon specialist attention, he's at a huge risk of being paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of his life. So this general surgeon calls a friend who is an orthopedic surgeon. They decide to jump on a hangout, which there's a webcam there and a laptop there, as you can see, and the orthopedic surgeon actually brings in 2 other specialists, and together they save this boy's life. The boy can walk. Now, when we came up with the Hangouts product, which is quite serendipitous in its nature, as I mentioned, we never thought that people would be using our product and our platforms in this way. And every day we are humbled by such examples of the creative and intelligent ways that people come up with to use our products. Another example, a bit more light-hearted, and again, totally unexpected, is, I'll show a video in a minute. It's something called photo walks. Actually, let me just show the video because it's quite self-explanatory.
Freedom for me has always just been going for a walk in the woods, finding the perfect light and getting the shot. I think I started when I was 12 years old, putting that canoe on my shoulders, carrying it down to the lake, and going for paddle. John Butterell, as a young photographer, his epic canoe trip, 1969. That was a long time ago. One day, I was out taking pictures, and I thought, how cool to be able to attach a phone on top of your camera and hang out with 5, 10 people, and they would see exactly what I see through the viewfinder of my camera.
It's gorgeous.
It was pretty amazing. And the next day, Corey Fisk came into the hangout.
I love photography. I have been living with MS 10 years, and this is my world. There's nothing more to my world than that.
I just said, Corey, tomorrow I'll take you for a walk.
I'm going to walk closer to that old tree over there.
Down a little more, right there. Love.
I think the video is. We can stop here. It's a beautiful video, but we can stop here. I think you. Would you like? Is it playing or? Hands up if you want to see the rest. It's just maybe a few more seconds. Okay, Oren, let's play it.
Through the viewfinder of my camera.
It's gorgeous.
It was pretty amazing. And the next day, Corey Fisk came into the hangout.
I love photography. I have been living with MS 10 years, and this is my world. There's nothing more to my world than that.
I just said, Corey, tomorrow I'll take you for a walk.
I'm going to walk closer to that old tree over there.
Down a little more, right there. Love.
Okay, sorry. It's on YouTube if you want to watch the rest. So basically, Corey gets a walk, and other people take her for such walks, and she knows what she wants. She goes over here, no, on the river, and it's just another wonderful and a bit more lighthearted example of the way people are using our platforms in ways we haven't expected. My last example or story really is about, I said, the third area, education, health, politics. It's about politics and the Arab Spring. It's, I'm sure you've heard many stories and seen many images. This is my personal story. No pictures, no videos. Like Renana mentioned, I look after the Middle East as well in my region. And there's a young man in my team based in Dubai. He called me on a Friday. He said, I'm going on holiday to Egypt, and I thought nothing of it. He has family in Egypt. Later on, I thought, why did he call me? There was something weird about this phone call. Was he saying goodbye? What was this? Then on Sunday night, his wife called me to say that he had disappeared, and she hadn't heard from him since he left Dubai. And then began 12 days of an intense search, I must say very gratefully to Google, led by Google, where we searched prisons, morgues, hospitals, everywhere you can imagine. We actually had advertising up on Google, so if you typed his name, you would get an ad saying, call this number, leave a message here. And one day we realized that he was being held by the Secret Service of Egypt. Then we realized that he actually had been quite active in the organization of the Arab Spring. And perhaps some of you may have heard his name, Wael Ghonim. He was one of the several people who led to the Egyptian Arab Spring. He had a Facebook page called We Are All Khaled Said. And he was later on nominated as Time's most influential 100 people in the world and nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. But I wanted to share the story with you, and there's many colorful chapters to it if you're ever interested later. Because Wael, and if he was here, he would say exactly the same thing. He is an expat living a comfortable life in Dubai. He's got a very passionate cause, something that he really believes in. He is a true geek. He lives and spends a lot of his time, much to his wife's dismay, online. And this combination of, it could be anyone you know, it could be you, is really something that happened in front of me and something Wael always talks about. So clearly he worked a lot, and it's not just about updating your status on G+ or any social network that leads to such things, but which he definitely, in his modesty, underplays. But he really, it was really interesting for me to see this phenomenon so close to me, and I had to share that with you. So, to conclude, I started with a prediction and an optimistic start, saying I do think we are on the verge of the great leap forward. I think we are just at the beginning. Only 2 billion people are online, as you may have heard Eric Schmidt talk about it. 5 billion more people are going to come online. There are only 20 million businesses online of the 90 million that we have in the world. Smartphones today that cost $400 will cost, Android phones that cost $400 today will cost $20 in several years and will be 20 times faster. So if all of this doesn't make it the great leap forward, what does? Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to introduce Sinan, Professor Sinan Aral. He looks very young. He's a professor. He's a scientist. He is an entrepreneur. He actually just sold his first company this January. He's a professor at NYU and at MIT. He studies large networks, and he has a quite unique vantage point to studying vast networks with his work at the places like New York Times, Nike, and Facebook. So it is a great pleasure for me to invite him to speak now. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone hear me okay? It's okay in the back? Okay. Yonja, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the organizers of this amazing event for inviting me. It's a huge honor to be here amongst all of these incredible ideas and amazing people, and obviously to my esteemed colleagues who are making this panel such an interesting panel. So I'm a true believer. I actually believe that this is one of the fundamental revolutions in human history. I think that when we look back on this moment in history, we will realize that the moment that we digitally connected with each other will be one of the most fundamental changes in human evolution. I believe it'll affect the way that we engage in commerce. It'll affect the way that we act and interact, and it'll affect everything from poverty to the spread of disease to all sorts of other things. And today I just want to talk about one engine of this transformation, which is influence. How individuals influence one another in a social network is essential to understanding how somebody's connections in a social network will affect the pattern of demand for products, or how a disease spreads from one country to the other, and many, many other things. So to annual conferences ago, Mark Zuckerberg at the Facebook annual conference was asked, what do you think will be the next big thing in networks and in social networks and network science? And he said social commerce. Okay? So this is a UK Wired news cover of the magazine, which says, "Commerce gets social." And I want you to see the headline at the bottom, which says, "How your networks are driving what you buy." And the idea there is, what does it mean to the pattern of demand for a product when someone likes that product on Facebook or shares it with their friend? What is the value of a like or a share to the additional revenue generated from selling that product? Okay? And lots of companies are trying to understand this phenomenon in the commercial sphere. So you may have heard of a company called Clout, which tries to put influence scores on individuals based on how they change the behavior of their friends and what this might do for targeted advertising or viral marketing. That's my company that we sold there, Social Amp, which builds social commerce solutions for large-scale retailers and publishers. But as Yonja mentioned, it's not just about commerce. This has everything to do with things like political mobilization. People using Facebook and digital communications to mobilize people to organize, to get out into the street and protest. The same things have been happening in the United States with the Occupy Wall Street movement. People using digital networks connected to their cell phones to encourage their friends to do everything from buy a certain product, get out and vote for a different political candidate, or to get out on the street and mobilize to affect social change. And in fact, I believe that this is a fundamental engine of this transformation and something that is incredibly important to understand, both scientifically and pragmatically, if you are a business person or a public policy person. It's incredibly important because if we can understand how behaviors spread in a social network, and thus in a population from person to person to person to person, then we can potentially promote behaviors like these: condom use or exercise or tolerance or financial responsibility. And we can potentially contain behaviors like these: smoking or dirty needle sharing or fraud or violence. And I'm working on several of these types of projects, which I'm going to try and briefly describe some of them to you. So what I do is I mine or analyze massive social network data on the orders of tens or hundreds of millions of people interacting in a digital network at a time, to understand how people influence one another to do everything from buy a different product, to vote for a different political candidate, or mobilize to get out on the street and protest or support a certain political agenda. And when I was thinking about how can I really drive this point home about influence in social networks, I was thinking, well, who's a good person to talk about to really drive this point home? And I thought of this guy. Some of you may know him. He's Ashton Kutcher. He's a big movie star in the United States. And he's famous because he's really sort of the poster boy for influence in social media networks. He was one of the first people on Twitter. He took out big billboards with his face on it saying, "Follow me on Twitter." And he tried to get a lot of people to follow him, and he was actually successful. So I was thinking to myself, yes, this is a good, he's sort of the poster boy for influence. And I went and tried to find an image of him on the web, and I found this image. And when I found this image, I realized that he's actually the poster boy for influence, because this is a poster, and it has his name on it. On the bottom, it says influence. And at the very bottom, you might not be able to see it, I'll read it for you. It says, "Behind every great man is 3,953,895 followers," okay, which is totally out of date because now he has more than 10 million followers or something like that, I don't know. But that statement says something very specific about influence, right? It's about the number of followers you have. So with a show of hands, let me see all the people in the room who know who Ashton Kutcher is. Okay, that's everybody. Okay, now put your hands down. Now, again with a show of hands, let me see all the hands of anyone that has ever done anything that Ashton Kutcher has told them to do. 1. Excellent. So the ratio there is quite striking. So it begs the question, what exactly is influence? Certainly Ashton Kutcher has a big microphone, but does he create changes in the behavior of the people that are listening or following him? So I want to propose, and I have proposed in the literature, a different definition of social influence, how the behaviors of one's peers change the likelihood that or extent to which one engages in a certain behavior. And this is about behavior change. How we can use our homo connecticus status, our connections to other people in a digital world, to change behavior in different ways. And I'll describe some ways specifically where we can talk about making positive social change in the world using these scientific principles. So I have this cartoon on my door in my office, and it's two friends talking, and one friend says to the other, I used to think correlation implied causation, then I took a statistics class and now I don't. And the friend says, it sounds like the class helped. And the guy goes, well, maybe. And the idea here is that you really need to understand how someone's behavior causes a change in someone else's behavior, and for that you need to have causal inference. In this case, it could be a selection effect. People who have a greater interest in statistics and thus a greater proclivity to understand statistics are more likely to take a statistics class and join that class as opposed to an art class or a theater class. And so when you look at the average number of people that understand this difference inside the class and inside the general population, of course it's going to be higher in the class. But is this because the class is teaching them about statistics, or is this because of a correlation? Okay? And I'm sort of geeking out for a minute because this is essentially how you think about, or how one should think about, influence in these social networks. Now, in network science, this is known as the reflection problem. So we have abundant evidence that human behaviors tend to cluster in network space and in time. People tend to do things at the same time as the people that they're connected to. And the question is this because of peer influence? Their friend influenced them to buy that product or change their vote in the election? Or is this because of other explanations? And let me give you an example of an alternative explanation. In 2007, Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler published this really good study in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that body mass index increases are correlated over time amongst friends. That when someone's body mass index increases, their friend's body mass is also likely to increase at approximately the same time. Now, the journalists and the collective unconscious took this result, and you got front-page New York Times headlines like this one, "Are your friends making you fat?" Okay? Which is a really good way to place the blame on someone else, but it might not really be the true causal explanation. There could be alternative explanations for this, and a good possible alternative explanation is what is known as homophily, which simply means that birds of a feather flock together. We tend to make friends with people who are like ourselves, and this could also explain correlations in a network, pockets of obesity and pockets of non-obesity. And this phrase was originally attributed to Robert Burton in the 1500s, but it's an even older philosophy than that, because before Robert Burton, it was Aristotle who said people love those who are like themselves, and before Aristotle, it was Plato who was saying that similarity begets friendship. And just to prove to you that a long line of very worthy scholars have made this argument, it was my mom who said, hanging out with a bad crowd will get you into trouble. And she was none too pleased when I quipped at the dinner table that she might have gotten the causal structure of that sentence wrong, reversed. So Slate ran an article, which ironically, it was called "Everything is Contagious," which was ironically about the contagion amongst academics to publish studies about contagion. So it's apparently not just obesity that's contagious, but happiness is contagious, and product adoption is contagious, and cooperation is contagious, and my favorite one, loneliness is contagious, which I'm still trying to figure out exactly how that one works. But the point is that there could be alternative explanations for these correlations in the network besides contagion. Homophily is one example, but there are other explanations as well. For instance, people who are connected tend to be exposed to the same external stimuli. We tend to watch the same TV shows, so we see the same advertisements, etc. How do we know when one friend is really influencing another to buy a product or vote for a different political candidate? And the difference separating influence from homophily and all of these other confounding factors really is important for policy. And I'll give you an example why. If you are the chief marketing officer of a company and I gave you a data set, all of your consumers connected in the network, and I said, wow, there is a very strong correlation. People who are connected are buying your product as connected people. So people who are friends, who have a friend who adopted the product are also very highly likely to adopt the product. And in scenario A, I told you, this is 90% due to influence and only 10% due to homophily. And in scenario B, I told you this is 90% due to homophily and 10% due to influence. In scenario A, you'd want to adopt a peer-to-peer marketing strategy. Give people incentives to convince their friends to try out the product. But if it's scenario B, that type of a strategy may fail miserably, and what you'd more likely succeed doing is just segmenting the market on observable demographic characteristics and targeting messages to people who are likely to be interested in the product. And yes, those people will be linked in the network, but since they're not influencing one another to adopt the product, the peer-to-peer strategy, as opposed to the other strategy, may not work. And it's not just about marketing. The director of the NIH, who is proposing the obesity prevention strategy, can use the same science to affect positive social change. We did a study with Yahoo about exactly this question. Is there social influence in the adoption of their products? And we devised a new statistical technique to separate influence from homophily and social networks, etc. And we found a very striking result. We found that if you use a naive statistical technique, that you would overestimate influence by up to 700%, and that 50% of what you thought was influence is really just observable homophily. And I tell this result to my friends, you know, I'm very excited, and they go, wow, Sinan, you are a really big nerd. Like, who cares about that? 700%, 50%, it sounds very scientific, and my answer is that it makes a huge difference to what you can do in terms of policy to affect change. So we did a more sophisticated study than that with Facebook, and we asked a more sophisticated question. Instead of trying to figure out whether the products that you're selling are actually spreading through influence, can you design the product so that it's more likely to go viral? And what we did in this study was we looked at two features that you can add to a product. The ability to invite your friends to the product digitally, and notifications that are automated. As you use the product in your daily life, it sends messages to your friends telling them that you're using the product, advertising the product to them, and giving them a path to product adoption. And if you think back to Hotmail, in the mid-1990s, this is how Hotmail worked. It had one of these viral features. Every time you sent an email with the Hotmail account, at the bottom it said, get your free Hotmail at www.hotmail.com. Which means that every email was an advertisement for the product and a path to product adoption through that link. So we looked at these two different viral features, personal invitations and passive awareness, and what we found was that personal invitations were about 3 times more effective per message. That means upon receiving a personal invitation, you were 3 times more likely to respond positively and adopt the product. And so at this point, it seems like personal invitations are really the way to go in terms of viral features. And yes, we found that this nearly doubled the global diffusion of the product in the network. But what we found was that the passive awareness campaign nearly tripled, or 250% increase in the global diffusion of the product. And that's because even though they were less effective per message, there were many more of these messages generating more global diffusion. But when you looked at engagement with the product, you found that personal invitations made it more likely that the person would stick with the product or the behavior and be less likely to churn away from the behavior, which means that those types of close friend connections will generate more user engagement and more likelihood of sticking with any given behavior. If this is about stopping smoking and not returning to smoking, that type of engagement or stickiness is very important. If this is about sticking to an exercise or diet regimen, this is also very important. So what this also means is that there is a virtuous cycle between peer adoption and engagement. As I adopt behaviors with my friends, I'm less likely to leave those behaviors, and as I continue to use those behaviors or do those behaviors more, and more of my friends see those behaviors, more of my friends will join me, generating a virtuous cycle between peer adoption and engagement. And when I give this result in an audience like this, I can usually tell who the marketers are because they sort of lean forward in their seats. This looks like a free lunch, right? But it's not just about marketing. We're applying the exact same science to spread HIV testing in South Africa, where we are giving people incentives to take an HIV test and an extra incentives to convince their friends to take HIV tests. And they're actually making a documentary film about this called The Social Cure. So I just want to leave you with one final result, which was very interesting and striking to us. We looked at how your influence varied as a function of your relationship status on Facebook. I'm sorry, not your influence, your susceptibility to influence, how likely you are to be susceptible to other people's influence as a function of your relationship status on Facebook, whether you're single, in a relationship, engaged, married, or label yourself as it's complicated. And what we found was that single people are more susceptible to influence than people who don't report their relationship status. People who are in a relationship are even more susceptible to peer influence. People who are engaged are even more susceptible to peer influence than people who are in a relationship. And people who are married are not susceptible at all, apparently, to peer influence. And people who say it's complicated are the most susceptible to peer influence on Facebook. And we debate what is causing this result. And if you'd like to, sort of debate this result with us, please, come talk to me after the event, or better yet, come tell your friends to come talk to me. So thank you very much. So I have also the distinct honor of introducing our next speaker, Renana Perez. So Renana, besides organizing this amazing panel, has a really fascinating background and history that motivates her to speak on this panel and informs her to speak on this panel. And she's also a very good person to know for a good reason that you're about to find out. She's a physicist by training. She spent about 10 years working in industry before she started her own company called Per Se, which used neural networks to help understand and solve the problem of voice recognition. After this company, she joined the faculty of the Hebrew University here in Jerusalem, where she is teaching marketing. And so she focuses a lot on networks in a lot of different areas and fields, applied to commerce, applied to marketing, etc. But perhaps even more importantly than that, she's a food critic. So if you want to go eat dinner with someone in Jerusalem, she's the perfect person to connect to in the spirit of this panel. So please welcome Renana Perez.
Thank you. Thanks, Sinan, for the wonderful talk and for the introduction. A few weeks ago, I received a reminder for my routine medical checkup. And if any of you took this checkup lately, means that you're over 40, you probably know that these are very comprehensive tests. So they test your blood pressure and your level of B12 and your cholesterol, and your sight, and your hearing, and your heart, and you can even talk to a psychiatrist if you want. These are very important tests, by the way. Go do them on schedule. But the thing is that these checkups were designed for the Homo sapiens. They are not good enough for the Homo connecticus, because for the Homo connecticus, a comprehensive test should also include testing the wellness and good functioning of this wonderful new organ that we have as connecticus, and this is our social network. And in the time slot that I have here, I want to describe to you a new and very innovative method that we developed in our research team that can help us to quantify the value of our social connections and can actually tell us how good and functioning our social networks are. And actually what we want to use this tool is to take two people and to compare whose social network is better, who is more connected, because in the same way we can compare their height, their weight, or their physical strength. And as Sinan told us, the most classical and natural way of measuring someone's social value is to count how many connections this person has. And we call this term degree. So the degree of an individual is the number of other people with whom this person is connecting. So if you take this network, for example, it describes the connections between people who share information on computer equipment. And this guy here has a degree of 1, since he is connected only to one person. But this person over there has a degree of 2,218, since he's actively exchanging information with 2,218 people. So from a degree point of view, this guy here is way better off than this lonesome fellow over there. And for the Homo connecticus, it's very, very important to have a high degree. So if we take Ashton Kutcher, that Sinan talked about, in 1999, Ashton Kutcher had about 800,000 followers on Twitter, and he was ranked number 3 after CNN and Britney Spears. And, so it's very good, but it was not good enough for him, and he spent a lot of money and efforts on those billboards in order to become number 1. And eventually he made it, and he managed to pass CNN and become the first ever Twitter user with more than 1 million followers. So it was really important for him. And these people who have an exceptionally high degree in their network are called social hubs. And this guy here, his name is Ron Bates. He's from San Francisco. And he is one of the people with the highest number of LinkedIn connections. LinkedIn is a professional virtual social network. So for LinkedIn, Ron Bates is a social hub. And the fact that I know that Ron Bates is a social hub means that he somehow took care to advertise that. And so it's kind of a thing that it's important to people. But the problem with degree is that it's a structural measure. It's not functional. It measures your location, your position in the network, but it doesn't measure your performance. And just to give an analogy to the medical world, degree is like those tests that test your bone structure or your muscle strength, but they cannot tell us how fast you can run a 100-meter sprint, or how many scores you will shoot in a basketball game. So together with my two colleagues, Barak Libai from the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya and Eitan Mueller from Tel Aviv University, we tried to look for a measure which will actually quantify the value of information that you push into the network, how effective one is in promoting a behavioral change, and that's the important thing, relative to other people. Because even if you do it very well and other people are doing it better than you, then it might be that you're not as impactful as you thought you are. And in order to develop this measure, we were inspired by a well-known American classic, a 1948 Frank Capra movie called It's a Wonderful Life. Now, do we have here people who grew up in America, are American, received American education? Please raise your hands. Okay, so do you know It's a Wonderful Life? You watch it every Christmas? So this is, for the Americans, it's the ultimate Christmas movie. It's like a Givat Khalfon for the Israel. It's kind of a cult movie. And it tells the story of a very compassionate and frustrated business person named George. And George wants to commit a suicide. Okay? And then an angel is sent to him from heaven to help him by showing him how life would have been if George never existed. Okay, and the notion is that only by the absence of someone you can understand their true value. And let's just watch a scene from the movie. So can you play the video, please? Owen? This is George.
Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?
I've heard of things like this. You got me in some kind of a spell or something. Well, I'm going to get out of it. I'll get out of it. And I know how, too. The last man I talked to before all this stuff started happening to me was Martini.
You know where he lives?
Well, sure I know where he lives. He lives in Bailey Park.
Are you sure this is Bailey Park?
No, I'm not sure of anything anymore. All I know is this should be Bailey Park. But where are the houses?
We went here to build them. Your brother, Harry Bailey, broke through the ice and was drowned at the age of 9.
That's a lie. Harry Bailey went to war. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He saved the lives of every man on that transport.
Every man on that transport died. Harry wasn't there to save them because you weren't there to save Harry. You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
Okay. So our definition of social value is very, very similar in spirit. Look at this social network. And let's say that a new idea of product or product is now launched into it. And look at this guy here in the middle. And assume that he or she, they adopt the innovation, but they do not distribute any communication about it. The innovation will spread in the social system because of communication from other people, because of advertising, many things. And then the social system will end up with a certain level and speed of adoption. Okay, so this is the equivalent to the life without your social influence. Now, let's start playing this scenario all over again. But this time, the only difference, everything is the same. The only difference is that this person is now communicating about the product or idea that he or she adopted. Now, this very small local change will start creating growing changes in the system. Some new adopters will join, others will join earlier, some might not join at all. And eventually, all these small changes will translate into a new level of adoption and speed of the social system, which hopefully will be a little bit higher than before due to this boost, tiny little boost of social influence by this person. Now, what is the contribution of this person, since the only difference between the scenarios is this word of mouth of the person? The contribution will be the performance of the social system with and between the two scenarios. So we define social value as the incremental value, the global incremental addition to the performance, the speed and level of adoption in the system that was caused due to the word of mouth of a single person, given the fact that there is advertising and there are other people distributing word of mouth. And the way we actually calculate it is through large-scale computer simulations. So we take structures of data, structures of networks that we have data on, and we build would-be words with and without the word of mouth of different types of people in order to try and see what their social value is. And I want to share with you some of our findings. The first question we wanted to answer was, who are the real people of value in the network? If you take these two people here, the only one friend person and the social hub, who has a higher social value? Remember that according to our definition is whose absence of word of mouth will be missed the most. Now, what do you think? Let's have a little show of hands. Please raise your hands if you think that this social hub person will have a higher social value. Okay. Now raise your hands if you think that this only one friend guy will have a higher social value. Don't be shy. Okay. Okay. Who thinks thinks, please, now there's a third alternative. Raise your hands if you think that there is no difference, that they are the same. Okay, so what we find is that, of course, the social hub has a higher social value, but the interesting finding is that the difference is not that big. This guy here is 2,218 times more connected than this only one friend person, but his average social value is only 30% higher. To state it otherwise, this lonesome fellow, his absence will be missed only on average like 30% less than the social hubs of the network. Now you can say, okay, it might be that those social hubs don't have such a huge social value because, as Sinan told us, they're not very influential. You know, we all know, most of us know who Ashton Kutcher is, but we don't do what he tells us to do. So if so, what about experts? Experts are people who are highly knowledgeable in a specific domain. There are things they know, they have relevant expertise, and usually when the experts speak, we tend to listen and to be convinced. So we applied different levels of expertise in our simulations and tested whether experts have a higher social value than the average person. And what we find is that indeed experts do have more social value, but not much more. Their additional contribution is only 20% more relative to the average non-expert person. Does it mean that experts are not important? Of course they are. If you have an expert in-house, use them. 20% is a very, very nice gain. But if they are very expensive to get, if they are inaccessible, if it's hard to hire them, it's hard to motivate them for your purpose, then a bunch of regular guys can do the job pretty well. Now, what is the meaning of these findings? These findings mean that in a connected society, the average person is more important than ever before. The social network acts like a huge amplifier that emphasizes bits of knowledge and fractions of talents and merges them together. The social network does not diminish the talented, the connected, the influential, but it rather leverages the average person by compensating for the disadvantages of one person with the capabilities and advantages of other people around him. Now, we're still very far from the point where medical insurers can use our tool in order to evaluate the social network of people. I'm not even sure that this is our final goal, but we are using this tool. We are working on it. We're very, very excited because this tool is a very powerful analyzer that really lets us understand or help us understand some of the mysteries and intricate relationships in the social networks we live in. Thank you very much. Now, you know, while some of us are, here it is, still struggling to use their iPhones or Androids and internalize all these enormous options and opportunities we have, some people have already started to plan the future for us. And our next speaker, Professor Raj Reddy, is one of them. And Professor Reddy is the Mosda bint Nasser University Professor of Computer Science and Robotics at Carnegie Mellon University. And he's one of the big visionaries of the Connecticut Society. When a hard disk of 1 gigabyte used to cost $10,000, Raj Reddy was already busy planning projects such as the 1 million digital books or the World Digital Library. And he is a French Knight of the Legion of Honor, and he's the 1996 winner of the Turing Award, which is the Nobel Prize for computer science. So, he is an extremely nice person, And I just have to tell you that, you know, some people, you have to work a lot to get their time and attention, and Raj was always there to us, willing to help, to contribute his knowledge and experience to the panel, and I'm so glad to have you with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Raj Reddy.
Good morning. It's a little after morning, but we started early. So how many of you were at the panel yesterday, the first panel, where Yuri and Eric Schmidt talked about things? About half. So their talks made my talk a little bit easier, but since only half were there, I will just... the great thing about the two talks were they did talk about what tomorrow might be like. What are the possible futures? What they did not have time to is what is the underlying technology that's driving it? And secondly, they did not have time to go far out into the future to say what kinds of things might be enabled if that we can imagine only at this point. Just like in 1980, if somebody had told me by 1995 we'll have, you know, a large fraction of the educated people in the world would be connected and be communicating by email, I would have said no, that's going to take much longer because the network infrastructure is not there. I've been using email from 1968, so I knew what could be done, but I was not prepared for the kind of explosion that happened in the late 90s. The same thing has happened again from 90 to in the last decade. You know, I thought the bubble has burst, nothing much is going to happen, and all the great companies that are going to be created have been created, the last one being Google, and lo and behold, Facebook idea was started in 2007. It did not exist before that. Twitter started 2 years later. So both of these are now beginning to be valued at the same stratospheric level as Microsoft, Cisco, and Google. And what we want, what we are all collectively trying to say is, you haven't seen anything yet. There's going to be many more surprises like that every decade, for as far as you can. So why is this going to happen? What are the reasons that this kind of future might happen, and how might it lead us in the next 50 years? So the first thing I want to talk about is the technologies. Many of you probably heard of Moore's Law. How many of you heard of Moore's Law? Moore's Law was proposed by Gordon Moore in the early 60s, saying the transistor count on a chip will double every 18 months. And that has held steady for as long as 40 years. The power of doubling is extremely seductive. Every 10 years, if you double every year, in 10 years you get 1,000-fold improvement. If you double every year, in 20 years you get 1,000,000-fold improvement. If you double every year for 30 years, you get 1,000,000,000-fold improvement. It's just amazing, and that's what has been happening. That's why computers for which, you know, memories and so on, I paid $2 million for 100 megabytes in 1971, I can buy it for $10 today. And so the technologies are moving. The Moore's Law mainly talks about how the computational capacity would increase. But there are a couple of other related exponential changes that are happening which are equally important. I don't know how many of you have been looking at memory, disk memories. You know, today you can buy a PC with a terabyte disk on it. And the disk memory technology has been doubling every 9 months. not 18 months, every 9 months. That means every, 10 years, every 12 months, it's been doubling every 12 months. So every 10 years instead of every 15 years, I get a doubling. And so the whole disk technology has been racing ahead much faster. The memory capacity of what you can store and has been racing much, much faster than computational capacity. Bandwidth has also been doing the same thing. The kind of, the reason you can watch a movie today on your cable is because the optical fiber networks have increased the bandwidth capacity that is available to you. That was not the case if you go back 20 years. I remember I knew it could be done, but I was talking to people. I was here in Israel in 1987-89 time frame. I was saying you should connect all the country with fiber. And the people in telecom scratched their head and said, we are not yet ready for all of those things. And so I don't think you still have it. There's absolutely no reason why every home in the whole world should not be connected with a gigabit connection. And it's almost free. You can get it for free. The bandwidth will be free. So that's the power of exponential growth. What we are finding is memory and bandwidth are actually doubling faster than the conventional computational capacity. So the question we need to ask is, what does that mean? What will it do to us in the future? So you already heard from Yuri and Eric Schmidt what kinds of things that you can expect in the next 5-10 years time frame. I would like to now take you beyond that, okay? And then kind of talk about where we might be. And so basically what this does is, if you have infinite memory, you can have as much memory as you want for zero cost. $1 for me is zero cost, okay? Okay, so, and if you can have as much bandwidth as you want for almost no cost, what does that do to the way we live, learn, and work in the future? So that's the main thing I want to talk to you about. You might say, Raj Reddy is crazy, he's talking about all these things, but they won't come to pass. But when you see it, you'll believe it. The first one, there are three things. Basically, we have physical barriers of space, time, and matter. Physics teaches us these are immutable. You can't do anything about it. So supposing I told you space will disappear. The barrier of space will disappear. So how can that be? Another way of saying it is, you can teleport yourself to anywhere in the world instantaneously. You won't believe it because that's time, space fantasies that you've seen in the movies. But think about it. Already, those of you, how many of you use Skype video? Those of you who use Skype are already probably doing video conferencing. And if you subscribe to premium, you can actually do many-to-many video conferencing, except it's low quality. And that's because the bandwidth available for communication is usually less than a megabit. But supposing you had 1,000 times more bandwidth, supposing you had 1,000,000 times more bandwidth, what would you be able to do? And what we are saying is, you can essentially teleport yourself to any place and observe the world from that point. And we have actually demonstrated it in 2002 on Super Bowl 2002 using the technologies done at Carnegie Mellon, where you could actually put yourself in the middle of the field and see the field and the defenses from the perspective of the quarterback. And you can read whatever he's going to read too, except he has only 3 seconds. You can stop the whole thing, freeze frame, and analyze it for much longer if you want. And that type of capability was already demonstrated and can in fact be done today, provided you had the bandwidth. And the idea is you can watch any game you want from your home, and from all the different perspectives at the same time. And you can go back and freeze frame and do various things like you might have seen in Matrix movie. I'll come back to that in a minute. So teleportation, or essentially elimination of the barrier of space, becomes something that you can imagine in the future. It's already there, but can be so much better. Second, the time. Essentially, if I can eliminate the barrier of time, now I can have time travel. I can't go forward into the future because I can't, but supposing memory is infinitely free, and I could capture everything I do every day from morning to night. All the speech I'm ever likely to speak will take less than a few terabytes. Everything I've done in high definition color will take a few petabytes. For the whole life I would have lived. Okay? Now supposing I captured all of that. As I said, a few petabytes today cost you a few $1 million. In 20 years from now, it will cost you $100. At that point, you will be able to capture all of this. Now, what can you do with it? This is a big problem. What you can do is have your great-great-grandchild come back to your life and observe everything you did and how you did it, what you did, and experience it as though they're part of your life. To me, that is time travel. You can go back 10 generations, 100 generations, and so on. And that's not yet happening. It'll happen in 10, 20, 30 years as memories get much cheaper. What should happen now are all the historical events. For example, yesterday's plenary session was breathtaking. I wish all of that is captured in high definition living color so that future generations can experience it. It will be possible, it will happen. So the third dimension, we talked about space and time, is matter. Matter means, can you actually take all of your body and teleport yourself like Star Trek and into another time and space and reconstruct your body? Or immortality. You can't have immortality. I don't know what you mean by immortality. If you want to live in the current body forever, even that may be possible up to a point by transplants and other things. But I'm thinking about immortality in thousands of year frame. There, the most likely thing is you would be able to take your embryo, a clone of yourself, and reproduce it 1,000 years from now, and then feed it all the material you captured in your lifetime, and it would learn, and it would know everything you knew, and then go forward from there. Okay? And then you'd repeat this process every 1,000 years. To me, that's like immortality. You are appearing on this planet over and over again, and it's the same you, and so you can actually imagine what that could be. But the most interesting one, to me, is the idea of Homo connecticus. Because what we are predicting is, as a result of these technologies, each of us has the potential to become a superhuman capability. That means, what do I mean by superhuman? It's not like Superman in that you're not lifting a whole Earth, but you can think. Anything anybody else can do in a year, you can do in a day. If you can do that, then you have superhuman capabilities. So I'd like to, because of lack of time, I'd like to quickly read this particular part of the concept. basically, at present, human intelligence is limited by the knowledge that can be acquired and mastered in one lifetime. We have no mechanisms for instantaneously tapping into collective wisdom of the human race. In the near future, a human Homo connecticus will be able to connect to the entire communities with access and uses of their collective wisdom, which Renana and others have already talked about. Individual human capabilities will be augmented in two ways. First, given a problem, thousands of intelligence agents on your body can search and harness the personal knowledge contained in the terabytes of memory on your body and petabytes of memory on the cloud. And second, the agents can query and retrieve relevant knowledge accumulated among your friends on the Facebook or tweets on the Twitter and their agents. It's not just them. An individual is limited by their biological capacity, but an individual, in addition to the agents that they have, suddenly becomes superhuman. If you remember, those of you who have seen Matrix movie, this guy gets into the helicopter. He's never flown a helicopter before. But within 4 seconds, he, with the help of his agent reads the manual and figures out what has to be done, and then kind of guides him, and together they fly the helicopter. And that cannot be done without months of helicopter training conventionally. But here in the Matrix movie, it shows how that could be done by you and your agents. Now, supposing it's not just you and your agents, but your collective intelligence of all of your friends who are willing to share what they know. Now, all of a sudden, you have a superhuman capability that is not there before. So that is the future I see. And I think we have a lot of exciting things that will happen, and we ought to be looking for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's now open the panel. We have like 10 minutes left. Let's open the panel to your questions and comments, and just speak up, introduce yourself, and talk to us. Yes, please.
Jim Tam, I'm from Toronto. I have a couple of comments. Professor Reddy, while I share and enjoy your conceptual fantasy of infinite memory and network-like bandwidth, so I just hope that we'll be able to circumvent corporation greed, so that we'll be able to get better price for all these internet services. And on top of that, the only way that your fantasy would be actualized is we will have breakthrough in medical research. I was with the Canadian National Defense for a time, and there was a declassified project I heard about, which was conducted at Stanford University in the 1960s. Basically, it's the implanting of a microchip into the back of the human head so as to homogenize the maneuvering skill of the jet fighter pilot at that time. The outcome of the project was with 30% success rate, but I don't know why the US government stopped that project. Anyway, that's the first comment to you. Another question to the professor from New York University. I have observed a very interesting phenomenon. I'm definitely agree with all the panelists. Without any doubt, within the marketing arena, the merit of social computing would be tremendous. But I have observed a very interesting phenomenon among my students in Canada. Maybe it could be a unique phenomenon among Canadian university students. In other words, mental superficiality as a result of getting information from the internet. What I'm trying to say is students has been deteriorating in their ability to analyze information. You see, the main purpose of university education is to train a person to have an analytical mind, so they will be able to tackle problems systematically and logically. And I think that ability has been deteriorating as a result of the introduction of the so-called information over the internet. So your measure of the inference, I wonder if you ever consider, in addition to measuring susceptibility to inference, would you also include what I call mental superficiality in your research? Thank you.
Should I?
Yeah?
Yes. So your point is very well taken. I also have students. But I think that there's another side to that coin. So your measure of performance is implicitly the individual's ability to decompose and solve a problem. But people who study the history of science have shown recently that more and more scientific research is happening in teams, not with individual people sitting in their offices trying to solve a problem. And in fact, the problems that are being tackled are much bigger than the problems that were tackled in the past, through lots of different ways to quantify the complexity of the problem or the... So I think that there could be a decrease in depth when so many different things need to be considered and so much information is available. Certainly the abundance of information creates a scarcity of attention, which may be the cause of what you're talking about. But at the same time, on the flip side, performance needs to be measured in how these individual units acting together can solve bigger problems. Certainly, your concern is a valid one, and one that we have to be very careful of moving forward.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, please. You're asking me? No. Women distribute more word of mouth than men. Married people or people in a relationship distribute more word of mouth than people who report themselves as singles. But as a matter of influence, we couldn't see any difference. So they talk more, but unfortunately, less people listen to us. But it's going to change. Other questions, comments? Yes, please. Sorry.
I'm Rosalind Swig from San Francisco, and I work in the community internationally.
Thanks, Anna.
My name is Rosalind Swig, and I come from San Francisco, and I'm very much involved in the community, both locally and nationally, and to a degree internationally. And one of my major concerns, since I'm coming from an older generation, is there going to be an emphasis on responsibility to really maintain and enhance values in the generations to come? Because all the things that you're saying are very exciting, and I'm so glad I came to this section. But where is the obligation, the responsibility, the compassion, the commitment to give back? Where is that in the technology world and looking forward? That's what I'm concerned about, and that's what I'd like to hear.
I would be very high, Yonja from Google. I think that's a very important question. And I will speak both as a Google person as well as a parent, as well as a Google person who thinks about parents. There's a lot of responsibility about protecting safety, privacy. I think there is a responsibility that definitely lies with companies like Google to provide those platforms for education. We have something, just because I'm thinking of child safety, we have something called the Child Safety Center that we've internationalized in 60 languages. But I think we're still at the very early days. Lots of people don't know about these tools. We have, again, for privacy, we have the same. These are topics that we, as a panel, between each other prior to today, have been discussing amongst us. I think you raise very important points, and To answer it quite briefly, I think the responsibility lies with us as, let's say in this case, parents, to inform ourselves of these tools and what they're doing to our society, and with companies like Google to provide tools and raise their awareness so that everybody knows about them.
Thank you. There was a question from this side. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Now you will stand, you step forward, and you will. Yeah.
Okay, but everything happens for a reason, I guess. I had a question to you regarding. I have my PhD research in e-brand equity, online versus offline. And what I thought about when you talked about Occupy Wall Street, I have a friend called Pete that did Occupy Wall Street. And one of the most important, I think, aspects or interesting aspects that I had, I met with him the people that started Burning Man, the couple that started it. And they had really similar, rules and way of spreading the words. Like they did offline, he did online, which is an amazing thing. And whether you've ever thought about researching the patterns that are the same in the online and offline word of mouth. So this is the...
Yes, so that's a very good question. And in fact, we do research this in a number of ways. So there have been some surveys done about how people spread face-to-face and offline word of mouth. But in fact, more and more, there are some research institutions and researchers who are using technology to study the same thing. So I have a colleague named Sandy Pentland at MIT, and he created, with his team, a series of badges which now are the size of an identification card that you would carry to work, to swipe to get into your building at work. And it has accelerometers, and it has RF sensors, and it has microphones. And it actually can create digital representations of the face-to-face social networks that happen by the water coolers in an organization. And the organization can think about or feed this information back to individuals so that they can think about how their face-to-face networks are evolving in the same way that you can map an instant messaging network or the maps that Renana showed you with regard to email or Facebook and other types of things. And I think that science needs to really consider to what extent is face-to-face the same as online, and how do they interact with one another? How does digital motivate the face-to-face, et cetera? So it's a very good question, I think.
Okay, we are running out of time. Apparently, we're not yet at the point when we can cross the time barrier. But we are still here for your after session talks and chats. We want to thank you for being here with us, for attending this conference, for your questions, for your positive vibes. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Enjoy Jerusalem. Enjoy the rest of the day.